This is Straight Outta Flushing, brought to you by your local Ford stores. Ford F-150 is the official truck of the New York Mets. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Straight Outta Flushing. It's your boy Dexter Henry, alongside my guy Tyler Ward, a.k.a. Wardy. We got a lot to talk about in Mets land. Some things happened last week in Mets land. Some things that Wardy has been talking about happening for quite some time. The Mets, they moved on from manager Carlos Mendoza. Wardy had a great reaction to that last week. I had a chance to be out at Citi Field on Sunday to see the Mets lose to the Phillies. Fun
My
time.
condolences.
Yes. I say that all sarcastically. I had a good time. It was good to be among the Mets faithful at Citi Field, but had to see them lose. Wardy, how you doing, man?
Dex, I'm doing great. You know what? There's a lot that we're going to get into in today's episode. This is not going to be as standard of an episode that maybe you guys have seen in the past where we recap the series and preview the upcoming. This is far more about the current status of the club, the drama that's going on with the team right now, and kind of fitting how we're talking drama regarding the New York Mets, and it has far less to do with the actual players, where it's not a Jorge Lopez tossing the glove into the stands type of thing. No, we're actually talking about player personnel from front office coaching staff. A lot to deep dive in today's discussion, a lot of which goes in direct hand with what we talked about for north of 2 months now. But a lot has been revealed, or at least has been stated, that has caused a lot of fan confliction. There are fans on one side of the aisle that are very much adamant feeling one way, and there are fans that are very much feeling another way. I'm curious to dissect your thoughts on this regarding the status of the Mets right now and everything that this is going to entail. So I think this is going to be a good conversation next.
Yeah, no, I do think it's going to be a good conversation. I guess one of the first things I will say, and I thought of you immediately as soon as the firing of Carlos Mendoza came down. And I'm not smiling because none of us are happy to see anybody get fired. Obviously not that. But I said, man, Wardy's been asking for this for quite some time. He's asking for them proactive. But I said, I wonder if the feeling from you and other Mets fans is going to be like, look, man, this is too little too late. This was too little too late. We wanted to see some of this earlier. Now, we have said repeatedly on this show, we were not ever saying that all of this was on Carlos Mendoza. Now, we were also not saying that he wasn't blameless. I think sometimes there's this need for people to pick a lane or pick this side and be like, it's all on him, it's all on Stearns. Like, stuff doesn't work like that. It's a multitude of all this coming together. Now, however you want to divide that blame pie, that might be different for you. The Mets had to do this last week. It was getting bad. There was nowhere to hide. And when I say there was nowhere to hide, I'm specifically talking about David Stearns. There was nowhere for him to hide. And really now, he is all out and open and exposed. If you didn't think this had anything to do with David Stearns, or you don't think he is any part of the blame pie, which I think is ridiculous, he's now out there and is going to have to take the proverbial bullets, I shall say. And some of that happened, which we're going to get into at his press conference. But my thing about this is, does it change how I feel about this 2026 Mets season? No. It doesn't change how I feel about the Mets season. Does it inspire hope for the future? No. No, because hope matters on what comes next. Hope matters on what they do after this. Are they proactive with some of the things we talked about in the last episode? In making moves, selling off. What's the plan? That's always my thing. You know this, Wardy. What's the plan? You have a plan. You have a direction. I think you'll get the fan base back on your side. And I want to say this. From being at Citi Field yesterday and on Sunday, and it was my first time there all the season due to recovering from my injury. Nice crowd. Very nice crowd. Nice crowd. Beautiful June Sunday. But, I mean, the fan base could not be less inspired with the product that is on the field. You can feel it. Like, there are moments where people want to boo and were booing because of the putrid offense. But there's almost, you could feel it. Like, there's this almost like, but why do we care? Let's just enjoy some of this sunshine, some of this nice food, and let's keep it moving. With all that being said, the Mets did this. Okay. I'm kind of a little apathetic towards this because it's just okay. Yeah, you moved on from Mendy. You probably could have done this a while ago. Do I think this changes anything this season? No, no, doesn't change much at all whatsoever. But let's talk about this. You had your reaction after Carlos Mendoza got fired and he moved on. David Stearns had a press conference after that. And I want to, before we get into this conversation, I do want to say it is absolutely positively important for leaders of organizations to step up and talk to the fans and talk to the media whenever things are going on the team. Whether it's a manager being fired, whether it's a player being traded, whatever it may be. I give the Mets a lot of credit in this. They have always put whoever is running the team and the organization out there to talk to the media. They've always stood there. David Stearns has answered the questions. He's done that. I think that matters. However, he had this press conference after he had to fire Carlos Mendoza. I think if you watched the press conference or read some things from the press conference, David Stearns, he could tell he didn't necessarily want to be there. Of course, he didn't want to be there. But how did you?
What do you mean he didn't want to be there, Dex? This is.
I mean, listen, it's part of the job, though. I want to be like, yeah. I'm acknowledging that it is uncomfortable, but it is absolutely part of the job of what you have to do. Now, there were some tough questions for him. I would say it's necessary questions for him. What did you think of how he handled the presser and his reaction to the questions that were thrown his way?
Just to put a bow on it from what you said in the beginning, correct. It is too little too late. More likely than not, Mendoza, 2.5 months of season, going back to the first month of the year, which is why really as I did this year. Obvious reasons for that. There was time for change, and there was still time for a group to come together and see that they can build around that change with a new interim manager. They waited too long on that. The Mets are 14 or so games below 500. If you think the Mets are going anywhere this year at this rate, I have so many bridges to sell you. Having said that, the entire presser was a different beast in itself. It was truly something to behold. Out of the many years of covering the New York Mets, there are a few pressers that as that one did. You had the media, including our great Mike Puma, the New York Post here, among others, as well as many other talking heads alike, asking critical, sometimes very blunt, straightforward questions to Stearns. And you could feel just from the outsider's point of view, because if I was able to get to Citi Field in time that day, I would have been part of that media scrum. I would have been sitting right there along with others asking those questions. But even from afar, I felt the energy. I felt the uncomfortability. I saw the look at David Stearns' face as someone who clearly did not want to be there. I saw a media chomping at the bit, ready to ask these hard-pressing questions because they have also been shot down by this same man over the past month. Our great Joel Sherman here on the platform about a month ago asked a question. What's the latest of the Mets managerial position? A justifiable question when the Mets were continuing to spiral this season. David looked at him, no pun intended, in a stern manner and said, you're not going to be asking me that question every 2 weeks, basically. I'm not answering that anymore. So for some of these people, I'm sure there's a level of feeling not only validated, but adamant on getting these certain questions answered because they feel that whether that they either felt slighted a little bit by David or just were not happy about how things have been operating at this point. Because think about it from people on the beats point of view. They obviously, yes, drama, of course, is going to be great for clicks. We understand that. But also success is great. So that way you're not asking the same question over and over and over again, thinking that you're going to get a different response. So David was asked by Mike Puma, literally, why are you not stepping down? Okay, you parted ways with Carlos Mendoza, but why does it stop there? Why doesn't it continue with you? To which David went on to try to answer that question and what was a difficult thing to do for him. Because at the end of the day, it goes without saying when you're on a 5-year, $50 million contract, you're not just going to be like, you know what? I don't need this anymore. For the most part, people aren't going to just walk away.
Right.
Then you add in all the other layers between him being from New York, being a Mets fan, wanting to do right by Cohen, this and that, and the third. So not only do you get that question from Mike, you then get a follow-up from him saying, okay, but do you have confidence? Has Steve Cohen basically told you that he has confidence in you and trust in you to continue to be the guy at the helm? Do you have ownership certainty? To which David said yes. Okay. Then you get another separate from Mike who asked verbatim, why should fans believe and trust you moving forward? Because essentially everything that's happened at this point has led us in a direction far from the reality that we were hoping to get as a fan. David goes on to state along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, how if I were in the shoes of fans today, I would stand their point of view, same sentiment. And he can understand that as someone who got into this field. He said this years ago in interviews. He got into this field by being a critical fan, by being bothered by decisions that the Mets made growing up, by being bothered by his other favorite teams and the way that they operated. He was very passionate about it. He wanted to build in this industry to basically have his own say. So talk about a full circle moment now for David when it comes to his own New York market, to be asked these questions about the fandom that he grew up being a part of. And he said that as long as I'm in this position, I'm going to continue to do everything in my power to basically put this team on the best position moving forward. Because what else is he going to say, right? And my takeaway from this presser is that David is so on the hot seat, it's nobody's business. We knew this was going to be the case. This was always going to be the case when you finally admit that your first-time manager hire as president was a colossal failure. Because to anyone, and this is where I have to go on my little TED Talk, Dexter, to anyone here that thinks that Carlos Mendoza is not at fault for anything, I don't know what you are thinking or doing, but it is so far from reality. I am perplexed by the amount of people in this entire sports space over the past week that have done nothing of criticisms towards Carlos Mendoza, but have done everything towards David Stearns. Because you can't view this as that. David has been a failure as a president since arriving here for the most part. It doesn't take a rock scientist to figure that out. It also doesn't take a rock scientist to figure it out that when the Mets were the worst team in Major League Baseball for a calendar year from June of last year to present day, that the manager is to a degree at fault for that as well. No, Mendy is not at fault for the roster construction. No, Mendy is not at fault for the lack of player health. But when it comes to accountability, when it comes to being a rah-rah guy, when it comes to making sure your voice doesn't hit deaf ears, when it comes to trying to change the narrative and the vibe around the club when things are going bad, those are all things that Carlos Mendoza swung and missed terribly, looking like El Mago with a slider 3 feet out of the zone, okay? That's my problem here. Because for whatever reason, we have to choose one lane or the other. Dex, why can't it be both? There's 3 lanes in the street right now, not 2.
I agree, but I agree with that point that you're making. And this is what I was saying earlier. I think a lot of times there's this case, even in what we do, Wardy, that it's like you got to take this side or you got to take this side. We're not talking about this with nuance. I think what you're saying is it's all comes together. Now, however you want to divvy up the blame pie, like if you want to say Mendoza's 40% and Stearns is 60%, I don't know. But to act like it's one or the other when it's not a combination, to me, is just absolutely disingenuous.
It's asinine is what it is. It makes no logical sense whatsoever. Unless you're doing it for purposes like what we're doing now, talking to fans on a platform for the New York Post or whatever it is, because you're trying to get a certain point or at times, different platforms and narrative across. Okay. But at the same time, though, that's just feeding into what's so wrong about this entire circumstance here. There needs to be that middle ground. So that presser really felt like there was no middle ground. It was, we all love Carlos Mendoza. He is the nicest guy imaginable. David, we hate you, David. Everything's your fault, David. That was my takeaway from that entire presser. And that's been kind of my takeaway since then. And I completely understand the criticisms with David. I have been highly critical of him this year, as have many other outspoken fans and talking heads have, reporters alike. But it's very frustrating for me, and I know I'm not the only one that feels this way, to understand that things have been such a failure from top down, but you need to understand there's so many layers to this. It's not nearly as clear cut as, David is at fault for literally every single thing because there are some things that were out of his control or out of his hands. The same way with Carlos Mendoza, there were things out of control and out of his hands. But that presser felt far less about figuring out the future and the state of the Mets as it really felt like people being like, we knew this was going to happen. Got ya. You're clearly not the right guy for the job. That's how we feel about it. Let me know your
So,
thoughts on that, Dex.
yeah, so I'll start with this. I never think these pressers following a manager's firing or coach's firing in any sport is ever going to be about the future. They're never going to give you anything about the future. By the day, I mean the organization. This is never going to happen. Now, as a member of the media, as a journalist, it is our job to try to ask the questions and the questions that the fans want to know as well too.
Of course.
So I want to be clear on two things. My colleague, great Mets beat reporter Mike Puma,
Shout
thought
out,
his
Mike.
questioning was fine. I thought he asked the questions he want. Now you kind of touched on something there that I do think is true to some degree. You mentioned our other colleague Joel Sherman, who had asked David Stearns about the managerial status weeks ago, and Joel, being the longtime columnist that he is, and someone who's known him very well, is going to do his journalistic duty and ask that question. He's going to he doesn't care if David Stearns tells him, I'm not going to answer this question every week. He's going to ask it if it needs to be asked.
And it's literally his
And
job.
and
Like he's obligated to
he's
do
doing
so.
his job. He's not disrespecting David Stearns. It's not about protecting David Stearns or anybody's feelings. This could be Brian Cashman. This could be Aaron Boone on the other side of town. It
For
doesn't
sure.
matter. What I think you're alluding to was that because there weren't answers, and this is a word you and I used before we started recording it, because there wasn't clarity for
Correct.
people in the media. When the time comes to get clarity, people are going to try to get that clarity. You understand what I'm saying, Wardy?
Right.
They're going to try to get that clarity.
That was
And
the
so,
time to pounce in that sense.
right. Do I think it's a personal attack? Not saying that you were saying this on David Stearns. I just want to be clear about that. No. But I think there's an expectation among the media is like, hey, this is the time we got to ask to get clarity because I don't know when David Stearns is going to speak again. Maybe after the All-Star break, who knows? This is the time to ask. I wanted to get on one question in particular. The first question that Mike asked him, which was, I think you put it in this order, why should you basically still have your job? Why didn't you also get rid of
Yeah.
yourself? Now, Mike phrasing it that way is,
Mhm.
to your point, nobody's going to walk away from the money that David Stearns making, especially when this was his dream job. He grew up a Mets fan. I do.
Everything's been a dream for him when it
Right.
comes to like this position on paper.
Right.
Yeah.
I do want to understand that part of what you noted in your TED Talk, Wardy, matters here. The fact that Steve Cohen, a Mets fan, okay, David Stearns grew up a Mets fan, and you thought, okay, not you specifically, but the fan base at large was like, hey, there are now two guys that have been invested in this team with their heart, their soul, that now are going to put this team in the right direction because they're going to care. They're not going to want to make the moves that Mets fans have seen in the past. However, all of this feels way too familiar for Mets fans. And that is
Way
way
too
too familiar,
familiar,
my friend.
Dex.
And
Oh my God.
that's the problem, my guy. That's the problem. Is that all of this feels too familiar. And I even think, yes, as journalists that are sitting there covering the team, you're supposed to try to be as objective as possible. But if you've been covering the team, covering New York baseball as long as Mike Puma and Joel Sherman have, even the familiarity of all that coming around creeps into you and your questioning because you're like, yo, why is this happening again? Why are we seeing this again? Why is this no different than any other regime? Why is it another situation where the Mets fire a manager, but the person who was in charge of that hiring or responsible for that hiring is still around? And how long is the leash for that person? Now, that's a question that Steve Cohen has to answer. But all those questions are fair. Does David Stearns want to be asked that question? No. Is he probably uncomfortable with hearing that question. I'm sure he is. But to quote Don Draper from Mad Men, that's what the money is for. And I'm not saying it shouldn't bother him, but when you're getting paid $10 million a year, an expectation that was set by the owner this year that anything less than the playoffs was unacceptable. And the Mets are not going to the playoffs.
From his mouth, mind you.
Yes.
He said this verbatim in like spring training. Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
This is part of it. And my point in saying this is all of this is in the territory. It's all in the game. This is all in the game. This is what's going to happen.
Especially with the dollars.
Absolutely. Especially with the payroll,
It's
which I
tough.
didn't even mention.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, to your point here, this doesn't just hold true for Stearns. This also holds true for the players. From the fan point of view, like myself and others, all the time when we come to getting fed up about guys or when they make excuses, which leads us into another great discussion regarding everything going on in the media space I want to share in a second, because we didn't speak about this prior to doing our recording, but I'm going to mention it here for you now. There is a problem when you can sympathize, you can relate with players. As someone myself who now is fortunate to be around the players whenever I'm at Citi Field now, on-field reporting here for the Post, I love everything about it. But I also understand that while these people are human and the only difference between them and I is that they play, a kid's sport for a living, they make a lot of money, is that really is the only difference. So at the end of the day, there needs to be a level of accountability held when they are making absurd amount of money and doing things that so many people in their wildest dreams can never fathom the idea of becoming a reality, just because they're not in the best headspace that day or something along those lines. I can sympathize or empathize, whichever word's best here, with people that go through their stretches throughout the year and have lack of success and they're trying to get out of ruts. But it also, in the way how Carlos Mendoza hit that Mets locker room, it hits deaf ears pretty often when it's consistently bad. And it's consistently bad with players that get paid, say, 5 or 10x, versus what the product is. As has been the case with Steve Cohen as owner, it holds true with these players. There's been nothing even close, even remotely close to a proper ROI and return on investment. Not even close.
I understand that people will hear some of that and say, well, Steve Cohen is a billionaire and he can withstand it. Nobody wants a bad.
That's not the point.
No. Nobody wants a bad ROI. The other point you made is, look, we understand that these professional athletes make a lot of money, but I do want to tie it back into labor, because all of this is, I always say this in sports, it is still a job. And you or I can't look at this differently than any other job, right? At your whatever, and I say this to all the fans listening and watching. Whatever your job is, whatever you do, hopefully you love your job, whatever it is that you do for a living, right? You want to be in a work environment where you feel valued. You want to be in a work environment where you feel that you can be heard. You want to look towards leadership and believe that they can hold other people accountable, because if they don't, you're not going to feel good about that. You know what you might say? Dex and Wardy, I don't know if I want to work there anymore. It might not be a fun place to come to work. Nobody wants to go to their job feeling like they're losing every day. That's not fun. Right? And sometimes, this is where I want to land the plane. Sometimes when it comes to a situation at your job where things might not be going well or people are not winning, I've got winning in air quotes here, right? Whatever the bottom line of your business is. I've seen it. Sometimes changes have to be made. And sometimes that's difficult.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Regardless of the money, what's relatable to all of us, working adults, we're talking about this sports. We talk about sports as a business and they get to play a kids game. It's still work. Yeah. So there's feelings at work that Wardy mentioned. Sometimes sometimes I might not feel my best coming to work or doing something. I still got to perform.
You think I rolled into this podcast today with jubilation and talk about the stats of the New York Mets?
No, but we still have to, and to take people behind the curtain, we still have to bring a good discussion for what we do. And we'll talk about this another time. Wardy and I were going to go a different direction with this episode today. And then said, no, we talked about something. We're like, hey, this works better for what we need to talk about right now, right? That serves Mets fans the best. And yeah, these things have to happen and they're uncomfortable. So at the end of the day, right? If you don't do your job, I don't do my job, Woody doesn't do his job, we're all going to be evaluated as we should. We're all going to be judged as we should. And hopefully, we're all going to be held accountable as we should.
Beautifully said, Dex. Perfect segue. I had in my head, you want to talk
Sure.
accountability. Let's lean into accountability because that's been the main thing lacking with
Your
this Mets
favorite
team
word.
for an extended period of time. Of course, because they don't understand it. I can spell it out for them and they still will not be able to figure out what actually that term is. So Will Salmon, great friend of mine, you know well as well, came out with a piece not too long ago. And in his piece was a great deep dive into the stats of the Mets clubhouse in particular. And the takeaways from this piece are notable that we should lean into here because you heard from him in this piece how speaking to some players, who will not be named for the sake of obviously
Yep.
obvious reasons, speaking on how after getting slaughtered in the doubleheader over the
Yep.
past week, which is what led many to eventually being fired, how no one stepped up to cause a team meeting. Major red flag number one. There were some little cliques of players that were toying with the idea, but no one stepped up to actually feel, it was justified to do so. Furthermore, what happens is that, as one player put it, yeah, because of the fact that no one really said anything, yeah, not really much changed. So what happened next was no surprise. And I quote, "We went out and did the same thing again." Another player said of a 4-3 loss in which the Mets' shoddy defense led to an unearned run when it comes to the terrible errors. The Mets, of course, had like 8 errors in like 16 innings, like truly historically bad stuff. So you add that layer, and then you add in the silence that came from Will when asking to a player point blank, is there a lack of accountability
Mm-hmm.
with this team? And the fact that he could not even speak on it speaks louder than
If
anything else.
I read this, and if I remember the exact writing from our friend Will Salmon was there was about 15 seconds of silence, and that's
15 seconds of
and if people
silence.
when you've asked somebody something and there's that kind of silence that is being described, that says everything without saying
You don't need
anything.
them to say anything.
And I said that to me was the most damning. I was going to say quote, but it's not a quote because nobody said anything. But it was the most damning statement without a statement being made in that entire piece. And well, how did you feel about it? Because I was like, yo, that says so
I was
much.
far from surprised. This is all in line with what I've seen with my eyes, what I've heard around the
But how
team
do you
this year,
change that, my friend?
everything.
Like
Here's how you
if if
change it.
if we're
Here's how you
looking at
change
that,
it.
like that problem's so deep rooted, my guy. Like how are you changing this?
It's a systemic failure is what is Dex. It starts top
I
down.
don't
This is
disagree.
not just from the
Right.
coaching staff. It's one of these things where it includes David Stearns, and we're going to get into this because everyone's favorite former Mets coach said no, but Eric Chavez spoke
It's
over
your
the past
boy.
24 hours. So we're going to lean into that in a second. Before I do, however, I just want to expand on this piece by Will, because when we talk about the players making the money that they make, and that's why, in part, we can only sympathize with you so much. We can to a degree. There's a barrier as to how far we can go from the outside on this. And when you hear from players making excuses along the lines of, well, when you construct a team like this where you have veterans coming in and you have rookies coming in and you have guys on contract years, that everyone's just focused on themselves. Talk about a systemic problem when it comes to a lack of leadership and accountability. Are you kidding me? So because we got a bunch of new guys in town, that means that you can't try to come together as a group? It's not just a one individual player problem, but it comes down to who is the voice of that clubhouse, which was Mendoza at the time, and who is the one that is allowing this voice to continue in David Stearns is a collective effort in their respective failures with this, because that is something that cannot be justified whatsoever. The Mets have had so much turmoil over the years throughout the Steve Cohen era. We never got a quote like that once, not even close. You got guys like Shamanai saying, "Oh, this is really bad. Like, this is not a good situation to be in." You
Thanks,
got
Sean.
other players out here that literally were looking at their phones, thinking and or hoping
Getting
that they were
traded.
going to be traded when Stearns messaged them in the morning that Mendy was fired. Just like
Yeah,
what?
what I
Like, if that is not a prime example of just everything that is so a mess with this team, I don't know what is. And that's where it comes down to top down. And that's where, yes, you can justify that David Stearns, while he is not at fault for everything, he's at fault for a lot here because he still makes the hires, he still makes the decisions, he still makes the okays, he does the yeses, he does the nos, and far more of the yeses have been the wrong type of yeses versus when it's time for those nos to come in. And you add that layer, Dex,
Mm-hmm.
and then if there's anything you'd like to share, go ahead. Then we have to add in the layer of who I will say a former Mets coach and Eric Chavez.
Before we get to Chavez, hold on. Before we get to Chavez, because I want to, and I definitely want to hear what you have to say on that. I just want to hit on some stuff you said there, because all of this, as I said, it feels like we've seen this movie before, or the movie's getting worse, and that might be how a lot of Mets fans feel about this. Okay. Now, the quote from the player, and obviously these were anonymous quotes given to Will Salmon, and I know some people may feel some kind of way about that and say, "Oh, well, if you say it, you should put your name on it. You should say it with your
No,
chest."
just be grateful you got the quote. You know, in confidence is
That's
from an actual player because we'll
that's
set it. You know,
what I'll tell people in the sport, particularly like baseball and today, with today and social. That's not going to happen. Okay, that's not.
and you don't get
You're not
that
going to
quote
happen.
without giving them that certainty as
Right.
well. That
That
goes without
certainty as
saying.
well. Now, the quote we talked about the non-quote with the 15 seconds of silence, but I do want to go to the quote about the player who said it's hard to win basically when you have this much change, new players, and everybody is playing for themselves. I do think when it comes to team building, I I'm with you. Two things can be true again.
Right.
I'm not deflecting here. I do think when it comes to team building in any sport, when you go, I'm trying to be careful my words here. When you go for value options, okay, and you sign guys or women in women's sports, professional sports, to shorter deals, you can get a lot of playing for yourself because everybody's thinking about the next contract they're going to get. There's not
Correct.
enough security on the team, right? I get that. That doesn't mean, to your point, that there still cannot be a unification towards the common goal, which is to try to win. Okay?
Or a collective effort in making it become that
Right.
way. That's what's so frustrating to hear.
Frustrating.
Dex, I feel like going back to this offseason, I said to you countless times, this much change, this much turmoil, year after year will never lead to sustained success.
Sustainability.
You will never find a team with the anomaly of the Texas Rangers in 2023. You will never really find a team that is able to have a run or consistent runs if they don't have a steadiness from their coaching staff to their core group. It's common sense.
I agree. I agree. And people who know me have watched my content. One of the biggest things I believe in sports that matters a ton. I believe it. I think it's an underrated thing today because everybody wants such instant gratification. Stability and sustainability matters a ton. Mets fans, I know it's going to hurt you to hear this, but there is a reason the Braves have had their sustained success they've had for a long time. There's a reason. You look right across town, the Yankees have done certain things, even though they haven't won in 17 years. There's certain things that they have been able to do for a long period of time. The Mets haven't come close to sniffing any of that. They haven't scratched that, and this is part of the problem. So when I hear that, it's a lot of the stuff I heard in that article. It's like, oh, to your point, on one side of the clubhouse, and I don't know if they could have been in the same place. One side of the clubhouse, you're hearing a non-answer about leadership. And on the other side, you're hearing what's going to come across, to your point, to the fans. I don't think the player was totally making excuses, but it's going to feel like excuses. And the reason it feels like excuses is because I was just at Citi Field the other day. You know what the prices are for tickets and parking and food and all this
Oh,
stuff?
Dex, I do. But please remind everyone at home, not Eddie Field this year,
If you have
prices
it,
roughly of these things.
I took public transportation in, so I avoided the parking, but I believe parking is northwards of $45. I haven't parked at the Citi Field in quite some time, not as a media
Parking's
member, so I
50
don't.
parking's north of $50 in the marina, like miles away. I'm
Miles away.
exaggerating the miles part. But
I'm,
like
I don't know the last time I went to a Met game, not as a media and so paid for parking. So it actually has been a while. It's probably been about 5 or 6 years. But food, I at least, I don't know what I spent on food yesterday, close to $100 by myself. Okay.
easily,
I
Easily.
look, I get it. So basically what I'm saying is nobody's trying to hear that. It's the point I'm saying. Nobody is trying to hear this right now. People want to hear, how does it get better? You said, the last thing I'll say, and we'll move on to Chavez. I said, whoa, okay, Wardy, how are you going to change this? This is a systemic problem that you also mentioned. And you said it comes from the top down. Well, they've changed the top. And I'm not saying this to you. I'm just saying I'm exasperated about how the problem is. They have changed the top. This was supposed to be different. Wardy, what's different? If I told you this was 2017 or 2018, would you know the difference?
No, I would believe you. And what makes it worse is in 2017, 2018 Dex, we knew this was the little Ponzi regime where we had an expectation each year to not expect much.
Fair. That's, you know what?
Okay.
That's more than a fair point. You're right.
That's
The
the
expectation was to not
frustration here.
expect. You're right.
Steve Cohen comes in flexing his over $20 billion net worth and says, we're going to change everything about this team, to which he has in many ways. And he deserves a lot of credit for the Mets' great efforts that they have made in their player development and their drafting and parts of their analytics department. I'm not saying they're all bad things, because they aren't.
Right.
And I appreciate those for what they are. However, the bad has most certainly still outweighed the good. And when the bad outweighs the good, when you have a payroll north of $400 million each year, and you have a yearly expectation to at minimum make postseason, and you have literally over the past couple of years selling out season ticket plans, this and that and the third, really building this up in a way that Knicks fans have been locking in with the Knicks since Tibbs came in 5-6 years ago. But what did the Knicks do? They did everything right. They played the playbook right. They kept a sustainability. They made moves when they felt it was proper, but they kept consistency with a level of that core, starting with Jalen Brunson. With the Mets, they have the stability in the beginning of that core with Francisco Lindor and now Juan Soto, but they have done a horrendous job of finding that sustainability around. Horrendous.
100% agree.
There's no sugarcoating it. It has been a colossal failure, and it's made myself, it's made you, and it's made everyone that's been passionate about this team over the past 5 years look like effing idiots for going to bat for either certain people in front office positions and then coaching staff, or the continued decisions that are made. Because we're trying to buy in just as much as the next fan is. And we are constantly falling short in that becoming the reality that we need it to be.
I love that you made a comp to the Knicks, and I know that feels very recent for a lot of people, but I just want to say this. I'm going to go to Chavez. When I was at Citi Field, of course, there were some Phillies fans, talking smack, talking with their chest like they should to the Mets fans. And a lot of Mets fans were just firing back at them and saying, how about those Sixers? Knicks in 5. And Knicks are the champs. And I saw people in Knicks and Mets gear combining their blue and orange together yesterday.
That will be me next time I'm there, more than likely.
Because that's the only way they could produce some happiness while showing their fandom. They're like, we got to throw some Knicks gear on too to make this okay. Let's go to your boy Eric Chavez, former Mets coach.
You need to stop with these boycott. It's everyone
that's your boy, man.
You're killing me. Me and Eric are so tight. We're gonna text after this. Don't even worry. Shout out.
That's Wardy's homie right there. So he appeared on, he was on the EC3 pod. This was a couple days ago, and
for those that don't know, that's Eric's own podcast. Just want to
that's Eric's own podcast. And he did not hold back on David Stearns. Okay, but he kind of didn't go in on Mendy here. He had he seemed like he had a lot more ammo.
I wonder why that is, Dex.
It was interesting. What did you make of his comments? I do also want to know something that needs to be noted here. He did say, in talking about Stearns, that a red flag was when David Stearns asked him to take a $30,000 to $40,000 pay cut after changing roles. So I do want to note that,
Eric, are we not going to act like you're a multimillionaire, Eric? Are we
but also, it comes across like what you said, right? It feels like a scorned lover here. That's what this feels like. It feels like a scorned lover who's just like, man, the breakup wasn't good. I have nothing good to say about him anymore, her anymore, right?
I used to love her, not anymore. Can't do it.
Not
You know,
anymore.
I can't
Yeah,
can't even
this is what
can't,
this all
can't even
feels
think
like.
about her without getting pissed off. You know,
Yeah,
um,
that was the energy behind Eric
which
Chavez,
is
man.
far from surprising. It's been very much on par with how things have been since Chavez's departure from the organization. He's been outspoken to fans online, to then deleting tweets, to then obviously the stuff he's posted on his Instagram stories, because this is Eric Chavez's world. We're just living in it. So on top of that, let's get into some of these remarks by Eric, okay?
Yep.
Because both things can be true. And that's a common theme that we have stated today. And I feel like we've stated this throughout the year. Because again, I don't know why people think that we have to be in one lane or the other. You can understand both sides of the coin here, but a lot of people just don't understand or can't fathom this for some odd reason. Chavez spoke bluntly and loosely about some of the experiences that he had as a Mets coach and what he witnessed that are factually correct. He also is only speaking on these things because he is a man scoring that is no longer in the position as a Mets hitting coach. Let's not get it twisted. There's a reason why he's sitting on his couch having this conversation right now and is bothered by what's happened with the Mets, because I'm sure there's a level of him that feels like he would be doing things better. I'm sure he's felt that way since the start. And
Mm.
maybe he's felt like he's even been dealt a bad hand from the start of David Stearns being there. But when you have someone like Eric going out of their way to say how Carlos Mendoza is not a fault for anything and that he was not the right fire, insinuating that David should be fired, I don't entirely disagree with the David firing aspect. But
Mm.
this is my issue. You were in Mendy's staff, okay? Color me shocked. You're advocating for Carlos Mendoza, a man
Right.
that you worked with daily, the same
Right.
way that David Stearns was on the point of almost crying to media because he loved working with him every day for 2.5 years. Take the personal attachment out of it, please. You cannot have that level and then be critical at the same time. That's not how this works. Okay, the same way how I have friends in this space and they know who they are, who will still to this day was stating on field over the past 48 hours how they're bothered that Mendy isn't here, that he should have never been canned, that he could do no wrong. Enough with this nonsense. It is ridiculous. So for Chavez to start this by saying, "Oh, Mendy's, Mendy shouldn't have been canned. He didn't do anything wrong." What makes you think that he would have done everything right if the roster was completely spick and span? Okay, the Mets had a magical run in 2024. How
That's
much
it.
is that Carlos
That's
Mendoza
it.
pushing the buttons
But that's
as
it.
it is Francisco Lindor being a great team leader, OMG happening, and the Mets having a team morale that went far beyond the manager? Because Mendy was not this big micromanager. Mendy let the boys kind of do their thing, and they did it greatly because they had a better roster. But even with that being said, it frustrates me to hear these remarks from someone like Chavez, who literally worked with him verbatim for years and always had a good rapport and relationship with him from our understanding. And then he goes on to say, Dex, David Stearns was the wrong hire from the start. Is that self-reflection, Eric? It should be. Otherwise, you have more pie in your face because you're only saying this because that same man fired you. And that same man, you have the gall to make that remark when that is the same man that kept you in a position that you did not need to be in this organization when he came in as president. He didn't need to keep you here.
He could have got it. He could have
He
got
could
rid
have
of you.
canned you as soon as he arrived. But
Absolutely.
no, he gave you a leash. He gave you a multi-year leash. It wasn't even like it was a one and done. So miss me with this nonsense that, oh, David was such the terrible pick from the start. I don't disagree with you entirely, Eric. We actually have something in common for a change there. But you are not the spokesperson me saying this.
Yeah, you gotta.
That's how I feel about that.
I don't have too much more to add to that other than please consider the source. Like you have to
please.
it's you have to consider the source here. And I'm not saying I don't want to tell somebody how to feel about losing their job or whether they should feel scorned or not. Like you're entitled to feel how you want to feel. But I just have to consider, as you're saying, the potential bias here. And I get it. Mendy's your guy. You worked under him. I do think to some degree of what you just said, Wardy, the people who are saying that there was nothing wrong with Carlos Mendoza are solely holding on to 2024 and saying, well, hey, he was the manager when they were 2 wins away from the World Series. And it's like, yeah, but there's more
it's like
factors
saying
into
David
that.
Pearson is still our best pitching option.
Right. But this is what I say about everything. There's always more factors into this. It is not just one thing you point your finger at. The success in 2024 was not I'm not saying Carlos Mendoza didn't have anything to do with it. That would be ridiculous. I also wouldn't say he solely did. I agree with you on the leadership of Francisco Lindor. We could talk about Jose Iglesias. Some of you guys are going to talk about Grimace. I won't do that. But there's a lot of things that have to come right for that to have happened. And let's also act like we don't remember this. In late May of 2024, before Jorge Lopez threw the glove into the stand and all that stuff went down, there were people being like, I don't know about this Carlos Mendoza. I don't know if he's the guy for the job. We heard that. I'm old enough to remember that. So, yeah, like Eric Chavez, I understand you gotta throw in the cape. I get it. You gotta throw in the cape for your guy. I get it. But we understand, man. We see this for what it is. We do.
I did have at least one quote that helps validate what I was saying. And there are things that he was saying that was truthful, regardless of his bias. And one of them, because unless Eric is lying on this, then okay, you're just even worse than I could have initially thought, Eric. But I don't think that's the case here. He's stating in this podcast how when Juan Soto first arrived with the Mets, things were tough for him his first couple months getting adjusted, obviously. We all knew that. We all kind of had an expectation with that. We kind of saw it in the way that he was slow rolling into spring training with the team and maybe a lack of team morale initially. You could tell that just Juan was more focused, me, myself, and I, as has been the case in his career. But now he finally has landed in his home where he knows he's not going to be having to worry about building up towards a contract or worry about his location for the ensuing years. He finally has a comfortability, but it takes time to adjust naturally. I completely understand that. But to Chavez's point, which I can understand a lack of being happy there or being bothered rather, is Soto would be sat down by the Mets assistant GM numerous occasions to basically call him and be there for him while other players in the clubhouse would see this. And brought up this topic to David Stearns. Chavez says these other players need to understand that Juan Soto. So you want to talk about a systemic failure. It still starts with David in that sense. Like, that is not a proper mentality to have. I don't give a shit, pardon my French. I don't care if you are at $765 million or if you're making league minimum. You're all on the same team together last time I checked. And Juan, at least he doesn't really, but he publicly tries to carry himself when talking to media, that he just wants to be like everyone else. That's why he loves the youngsters and the Carson Benjes and the AJ Ewings. They're vibrant, they're young, they're fun, they're loose, and he doesn't want to be viewed like this big anomaly on the team, even though he knows very well that he is when it comes to the talent and the star level that he is. But if you're getting a player, even with that caliber, coddled in that fashion, and other players see that, of course it could cause an imbalance in how either the clubhouse is or how the power structure of this team is. Right. And for Juan to have the type of control, not surprising. You don't get that kind of control. You don't get that contract, the largest contract in North American sports history, without at least having some pull. Okay? Like, that goes without saying. So I'm not shocked to hear that the Mets have operated in this fashion. But if you're doing it in a fashion where other players are either seeing it, being around it, or positively, negatively being influenced by it, therein lies the issue. So going back to Eric, should this hold true, I agree that that's a problem. And that's part of the many layers of issues that this team has and how they operate and the way that they think and who deserves more of a benefit of the doubt than others. You know, I think going back famously to Mark Vientos' quote last year with media prior to the trade deadline, speaking bluntly and how no one's really helped me this year. I've kind of had to do things on my own. You know, I haven't really had the guidance that, you know, I feel that I needed, where he certainly got from a veteran in JD Martinez the year prior in 2024, leading to his breakout season. I don't really have that this year while I'm dealing with these struggles. And it kind of is what it is, basically, you know? But think about hearing that from a player with an expectation that he thought very well he was probably going to be traded at last year's deadline. There was a lot of rumblings going on, and it still didn't happen. So then for that player to stay in that clubhouse, to be here a year later with all the trades, with all the turmoil, with this and that and the third, it is not painting a good picture because he's just one of various players on this current team that probably haven't known what their future looks like since the start. So that is where we could go back to Will Salmon's remarks from an anonymous player and say, okay, you do understand it, even if you don't agree with it, even if you think it's a failure from the organization down, doesn't change the fact that that's actually happening. It is actually
Mm.
happening where players are locked in on themselves in this kind of New York market and far less concerned about building the team morale around them. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that that isn't genuinely how they feel because it clearly is how they feel. But going back to the top decks, this is such a massive problem. And
Oh,
that's why looking through a lens, reflecting on this season, heading into it, we were doomed from the start. We really were. Like
that's
that's why I just wish I didn't advocate as heavily as I did to be for a lot of the things that were happening. Because
right.
of course you want to buy into the blind optimism. You want to buy into players with track records when healthy and that they could be good for you. And when everything comes crashing down at once, it just this is the rubble that's left of what's a terrible Mets season.
Sadly, and what's left, and then we'll close with this. What's left this Mets season is going to be a lot of the topic that Mets fans are going to ponder over the next couple of months, second half of the season. Who should be the next manager of the New York Mets? Um,
Let me ask you that for without even deep diving it, Dex. Who's the first person that comes to your mind, knowing that Andy Green, who I like a lot, very well spoken, not a slight at all against Mendoza, but it's nice to have a refreshing manager like Andy Green be pretty much straightforward with some of the things he's saying to media and his post game pressers we've seen the past couple of days. He's made it known he will not be here once the
right,
season's over. He
going
will
back
go
to the
right
front
back to
office.
player development. And I don't fault him because that's a job he's passionate about. He can still be around his family without being consumed as much on the day-to-day operation that is the New York Mets. I don't fault him at all. That's completely, he loves his position, and I like him there. He's done very good with guys like AJ Ewing, Christian Scott, Carson Bench, just to
As a
name a few over the
manager.
past couple. He's had his hands on those players, undoubtedly. But who was the first person that comes to your mind that you would like to see at the helm for the New York Mets?
The first
For
person that
future?
came to my mind, first person for me that came to mind that I wanted to see as manager of New York Mets is a guy who really should have had his chance before. That's Carlos Beltran. It's the first person that came to mind. Listen, I think if you ask me who I think is the best managerial candidate out there, it would be Alex Cora. However, I think a lot of this depends on what the Phillies do this year. Now with Don Mattingly, I see him just as more of a there's more of a pathway to him to get to Philadelphia than I see to New York. But you never know. You never know. The Mets went and got Alex Cora. Would I be mad? Hell no. Yeah,
And he's a
he's the
former New York Met. People forget
right.
about that.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That's right. He's the best manager to me available. And now I want to say this to people because some people are going to say, Dex, you're just probably leaning into the Mets nostalgia. Carlos Beltran, who I think was a damn good New York Met that sometimes some fans did not appreciate because all they can think about is him looking at strike three to end the 2006 season to Adam Wainwright. I think Carlos Beltran will be a good manager from all you heard about when he interviewed before for the Mets and had the job before everything that came out with the Astros cheating scandal. And then the Mets had to move on because the optics would have been bad. I think enough time has passed. I think he'll be fine. I think you could bring him back. Um, I think he knows the organization. He's worked in front offices before. He's now around this team. He's worked with the Yankees. I think he can relate with a lot of the players. And I think he's going to be able to communicate because all we heard about Carlos Mendoza is he communicates well with the guys in the clubhouse. But I think he could bring the A word that Wardy's been asking for. I think he could bring some of that accountability as well too. It's a guy who's understands deep playoff runs, gets that the whole nine. So I think he would be good. He's the first name that comes to mind. Now look, we know his number is getting retired later this summer. Um, how nice would it be to see his number retired and then the Mets hire him? But for me, it's like if I'm going into this under the assumption that Alex Cora probably has just a smoother pathway to the Phillies than he does the Mets. If you tell me if the best guy, I'm going for Alex Cora. Carlos Beltran's the next guy I would want. Would I be mad at some of the other guys who have thrown their name in the hat? Albert Pujols has thrown his hat into the ring. I spoke with Albert Pujols last fall. I think it was in October, and I asked him about manage. This was right before the start of the playoffs, and I asked him about his aspirations for managing, and he said, he told me it's something he'd want to do. This is before he obviously managed the Dominican team in the World Baseball Classic. I think Albert Pujols also strikes me as a guy that would bring that level of accountability and change the culture. We've seen former players be successful, so I think this could happen. And then you have David Ross as well too, who's thrown his name in there too, who I think is a very interesting candidate. I think for the Mets fans that are looking for a little bit more fire, a little bit more the guy that's going to probably say a little bit more and hold guys accountable in for the media sometimes. I think some Mets fans want to see that. I think he could be your guy. I don't think any of those candidates are bad. Beltran will be at the top of my list that I think is more accessible, but I also understand why. And I don't know how you feel about this, Wardy. Some Mets fans might want to say, let's get outside of the organizational ties that a Beltran has here. Let's go with maybe somebody else that's outside of the organization. And I understand that too. I don't think any of the candidates listed to be bad. Again, if you told me I had directly had my pick right now, nothing else mattered, I'm going Alex Cora because I think he's the best manager out there. Go get the best manager available. But here's the thing. Sorry for my long talk on this. At the end of the day, this looks like this will be a David Stearns hire. Okay? Looks like right now to be. Whoever is the next manager of the New York Mets has to be interlined, interwoven with David Stearns. They got to be interlocked, intertwined, interwoven, however you want to put it. They have to be on the same page. There can't be any more of this, guys are playing for themselves. It can't be. Because if you're hearing that again, there can't be that. It just can't be. And whoever comes in has to be aligned with the top and David Stearns, and that message has to then trickle down to the players. So yeah, all things considered, if everything is even, I would want Alex Cora. But if not, because I just think there's a direct line from going to Phillies, I'd go Carlos Beltran. I also would like to see Carlos Beltran get a shot because I do think he could be a good manager.
So to unravel all that you said there, starting with Pujols, for a first-time manager, there are literally no other player or anyone in the baseball space that you could find that has a greater track record than Albert Pujols. He's casually one of the best hitters, if not the best hitter that we've witnessed in our generation. Okay, so knowing that is an option is an enticing one because it goes without saying, not a personal slight on Mendoza, but if you had to look at Carlos Mendoza on your left and Albert Pujols on your right as an active player in the Mets clubhouse, who is the one that's going to lead you in a direction that's probably going to give you more of a rah-rah feel or motivate you? It's the guy that has the track record that is the home run king. That's a Hall of Famer. Everything else entails. Like, Pujols doesn't need to say anything for you to understand like what the expectation should be, but he will. And he's very passionate about this. And I love his passion. I love his connection with Juan Soto because at the end of the day, Juan Soto is going to be the leader of this team moving forward. He will be. It will not be Francisco Lindor. Juan will be here longer term, barring changes. So I think it's also important to bring in someone that can also guide Juan in a way where maybe you're not getting that kind of coddling that the Mets were previously doing initially with their front office. Because Albert knows from one star player to another what it takes to win, as does Juan in his own unique way, going back to his time with the Nationals. But they can come together and I think really bode well with the rest of this clubhouse, especially with the way that the Mets culture has been trying to shift, even though it's been more for worse than better over the past couple of years. David Ross is an interesting one because David will probably be advocated heavily by the Mets' current manager more than anyone else. Andy Green was the bench coach for David Ross during their time in Chicago before they were canned for Craig Counsell. Andy Green is only with the Mets right now because of the fact that David Ross was kicked from the Cubs. And Andy's like, I can't be here anymore because, like, David's my guy, literally. So the fact that David Ross just threw his hat in the ring is a great thing. Great mind, long-time catch. Usually former catchers also are just savvy managers because they understand. They view the game in a way that very few others do. Yes, and I like that. I think that's a good thing. How would he handle the New York market? I don't know, and that's always going to be a question mark, right? But as is the case with what feels like anyone. Then you add in Carlos Beltran, who I love dearly, and I firmly believe he will be in this Mets coaching staff at some point.
I feel like there's
But
a bet. I
here's
feel
what
like
I
there's a
want.
bet. Here we
Here's
go.
what I want.
All
I don't
right.
want Carlos Beltran to be the Mets next manager, given the current
Ooh.
options out there. I want him to be the Mets bench coach because I want Alex Cora to be the Mets manager. That's what I want. I want
Well,
Alex to come in here. Let me paint the picture. Let me
yeah.
before you think there's no way that could happen, that there might be a power struggle
No, no,
here.
no. I,
Let
I
me say
don't.
this.
I just think it'd actually be dope if that happened. I actually would be like, who wouldn't sign up for that tomorrow?
But
I'd
that's
sign up for that.
and I understand it might be easier said than done because Carlos might have been waiting in the wings at this point to become Mets manager again. And if that's the case, and that's his only expectation being the Mets only rule to be in the Mets coaching staff, okay, heard that. But all I got to say is that Beltran, Cora, what do they have in common? Oh yeah, teammates with the Mets. What do they also have in common? Like this with the Astros, cheating
Mhm.
scandal or not. Literally, Cora was on that bench while Beltran was winning a championship with them, and they have a really good rapport and relationship together. Okay, so the idea of bringing Alex Cora to make him far and away the largest paid manager in baseball, because you know that's what will have to happen to land him. You think Craig Counsell's getting a lot of money? Wait until you see Alex Cora get at least 10 to 12 bands a year, probably. That's what'll likely happen, right? It's all going to come down to the money. And the Phillies, I'm not really sold on that notion per se, depending on what they do this year, because their core is aging. And their core, this probably feels like the year that they need to win. Otherwise, it's going to be completely dismantled. So
Mhm.
I don't know how much I buy into, oh, it's kind of Phillies or but. I don't think that way at all, actually. I think Alex said, I want to take time with my family because I want to be the highest paid manager in Major League Baseball history. Understandably so. So you bring in Alex, who knows exactly the way that he's going to go about approaching the team, who understands this New York market, who has family and familiarity here. You bring in Carlos as a 1-2 punch where they can collectively come together. And not only do you get the former player experience with both, with Carlos trumping the other in the sense of how he performed at the major league level. Not that Cora had a bad career, but Carlos Beltran's Carlos Beltran. He's a Hall of Famer
Right.
for a reason. To have those together, two players, former players, especially with that kind of, Puerto Rican influence as well, I can't see how that would be a bad thing for this team. I really don't. From all that the Mets have been building over the years, to how they've been constructing, to what they're looking for, I don't know how you wouldn't find accountability with players like that at the helm. I really don't. And only time will tell. But that's my dream scenario.
I
Bring
like
Alex
the
Cora
dream.
in as your manager, have Carlos Beltran be your bench coach, and then hope that that is something that can be sustainable that they build for the next at least 5 years.
I like the dream. I think it comes down to what you just said, though. What's the aspirations for Carlos Beltran? Does
Right.
he does he see himself as like, okay, being a bench coach is my pathway to getting back into a full time job in the major leagues as a manager, um, or not? Like it depends. But if they really like working together, that'd be dope. We know they like each other. We know they're cool. They play for the Mets, as you said, with the Astros. Yeah, I that's a great dream scenario. So I think we both are in the same boat of Alex Cora is the best manager in baseball that is available. Go out and get him. Now the Mets could overwhelm him. Maybe you're right. The pathway to the Phillies is not as clean. Um, the Phillies do have a lot of pressure to win this year. If they don't, he might not like the Mets situation. But I think the Mets, I think what could help him is you've got Juan Soto, you've got some young players that look like players in the lineup in AJ Ewing and Carson Bench. You've got Noel McLean. There's ways you can think things that could be bright about the Mets' future for Alex Cora. But you know what? He's got to also believe in the culture of the Mets going forward. He's got to be sold on that too, Wardy. He's got to believe in that too in the vision. So the Mets have to sell him, but they also have to give him the power and control to execute that vision. We will see. Let us know what you think about the Mets manager. Who should be the Mets manager, the next manager of the Mets, which is, yeah, this is where we are. Next Mets manager. What are the next moves? This is where we are. This is where we are right now.
Usually we talk about this in the offseason, Dex, not on June 29th. But you know what? We're,
yeah. But it
yeah,
feels like the
we're
off.
getting early on this.
It feels like the off season already, man. But that's gonna do it for this edition of Straight Outta Flushing. We appreciate you rocking with us. Again, let us know what you think about Wardy's boy, Eric Chavez, and his comments about David Stearns, how he handled the presser, about who should be the next manager of the New York Mets. We want to hear from you. We'll be back with more content for you later in the week. We have another episode planned for you guys that we think should be a little bit fun, in which we look at some moves that have been made to the Mets. We'll have more on that coming soon. That's the great Tyler Ward. I'm Dexter Henry. We'll catch you next time. Another edition of Straight Outta Flushing. Peace.